a lot of it for me boils down to the loss of culture and how Indigenous people are trying to rebuild themselves through culture. And so, when I was talking about all of the the hard things that I was trying to work through in high school, and I didn't quite have the language for, and all of the things that I wrestled with in university, and still now, it much of it boils down to the way in which Indigenous people were dispossessed of their culture, and how they are trying to find their way back through culture, and part of this is through physical culture. So I think it's really important that people understand that history and what it is that Indigenous people are trying to do with that history through physical culture.
What's happened in the last year for me is it's really driven home the fact that it's no longer, I always thought it was good enough, and my parents raised me this way. You look at everybody the same, you treat everybody equally. The best person gets the job, the fastest runner makes the team, whatever. Like, that was always my philosophy, and that always used to be way out ahead, but it no longer is, right? So no longer is it enough to be passive and supportive and open. It's so much more than that, and you're just part of a structure that's discriminatory if you're not. So the big word, and such a simple word for me, is to be much more proactive, much more deliberate. So if you really want to make a difference, you've got to change cultures. And so that's one thing I really learned at Ohio. And the only thing we had success with is quota systems don't work. We all know that. Just, it's no good for the quotee, and it's no good for the quote. You need to change the culture so people feel welcomed, in your word, belonging in a certain place. And so that doesn't come around targeting certain groups. That comes to building an accepting, welcoming culture.
To be honest, it's an industry that's mostly led by white cisgendered men, right? And so because of that, that lens is almost built into the foundation of how marketing works. Everything from the survey to the design of the project and whatnot. So there's this idea of intercultural sensitivity, which is based on the Dr. Bennett developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, which is a mouthful, but it's a wonderful model. If you haven't heard of it, it's worthwhile to take a look at. And what it talks about is understanding, having people have more ethno-relative lens. And what that means is being able to understand that you exist with your lens and your bias, but so does everybody else, right? And in order for us to actually resonate with others, we can't expect us to be able to adopt another person's lens. Lived experience is something that needs to be honored. And the whole idea about nothing about us without us, which is a really important term in the DEI community, is to know that as marketers, we can't claim to know what each community needs just by learning about them. That's why lived experience and having individuals with lived experience as part of that design process is so important. And to make sure that those voices and that piece is a part of it. One thing that we speak to as well is that not only lived experience, but also the ability to have intercultural sensitivity, because there's a lot of internal racism in a lot of cultures, and having that level of expertise is sometimes natural, but also something we need to vet as we're inviting people to the room to design as well.
It's only, for me personally, I'm halfway through my life, Andrea, and it's only become a recent phenomenon for me in the last probably 2 years, based on my diversity and finding where I've come to in my life, and how, through the gender transit, the gender trajectory in our society, and how that applies to our social acceptance of diversity, and that lived experience, and what that meant to me, and how the system did not support that, and the oppression and the resilience that was put upon me at a national level, but also at an international level.
Culture, sport is culture. Mainstream sport is culture. Indigenous physical culture is culture. But there's, this movement now to try and reclaim Indigenous cultures and to rebuild identities through sport. And not a lot of people quite understand that. They think they can do that through mainstream sport by not changing anything. Just you get involved in mainstream sport and then everything will kind of be fine, as if sport is apolitical, but it isn't. And so it makes it very difficult then for Indigenous people to, move forward with their own aspirations for sport in their own way, because people just fundamentally don't understand the history, and they don't understand where it is that people are trying to go. And they think that the system that is already there is the best way to do it. And the Indigenous sports system somehow is just some sort of tertiary system, like it's some sort of like, secondary branch that can be given a little pot of money like every now and again and supported, and then they'll be fine because well, they're doing culture, they're doing something different. It doesn't have to be supported in the same way or equitably. So yeah, culture, I think for me is this really deep kind of headspace that I've had to think through, that I've felt, and I think a lot of people are kind of in the same space.